back with your next class. In today's class, we're going to discuss certain important terminologies associated with DNA, and then we are going to discuss DNA packaging. All right. So let's start with central dogma. See, central dogma means unidirectional flow of information. Okay, and it was suggested or it was proposed by Francis Crick. All right. Now, what is the meaning of central dogma? Central dogma, as I told you, basically means unidirectional flow of information. That means whenever the information is transferred, okay, from the genetic material, that is the DNA, first from the DNA, the information is transferred into a mRNA, and from mRNA finally it is encoded into a protein. Okay, so DNA to RNA, RNA to protein. It's never going to happen like protein to RNA or RNA to DNA. It doesn't happen as such. Okay, so that's why we call it unidirectional flow of information. Understood that? Fine. Unidirectional flow of information means DNA is first transcribed into a mRNA, and from mRNA the information is translated into a protein. Understood? Fine. So see here, unidirectional flow of information from master copy of DNA to working copy of RNA to building traits expressing polypeptide or protein. Okay. So it was proposed by Francis Crick, and this is how you write down the central dogma. See, DNA is transcribed. Transcription, the process when DNA is encoded into a mRNA or messenger RNA, we call this process to be transcription. Understood? So DNA to mRNA, that is happening via transcription, and mRNA is finally translated into protein. So this is translation process. Fine. So unidirectional flow of information applies to most organisms, be it prokaryotes, be it eukaryotes. All the living organisms mostly will follow central dogma. Fine. But then there are a few exceptions to this rule, and that would be shown by a few viruses in which the genetic material is not DNA, rather it's RNA. Okay. And we call those kind of virus to be retrovirus. Okay. Retrovirus. They do not obey central dogma. But other than that, every organism would obey central dogma. That is, from DNA, the information would go on to mRNA and RNA to protein. This is what will follow throughout. Clear? Now, next would be reverse central dogma, which is an exception to central dogma, and it's applicable to retrovirus. All right? So reverse central dogma, it was proposed by Temin and Baltimore in 1970, and hence reverse central dogma is also known as Teminism. Okay. So in certain of virus called retrovirus, as I've told you already, the genetic material instead of DNA would be RNA. So what they have is a special kind of an enzyme called reverse transcriptase enzyme. Okay. Reverse transcriptase enzyme have this unique ability to form a DNA from RNA template. Okay. Their genetic material is RNA, है ना? Usually क्या होता है? DNA से RNA बनता है. पर ये रेट्रोवायरस में जो जेनेटिक मटेरियल है वो क्या है? RNA. तो उनमें क्या होता है? RNA से DNA बनता है. Okay. Using the RNA, they are going to manufacture a DNA. Okay, and that is going to be done by the enzyme reverse transcriptase. Understood? So what they would do? They would make first from RNA to DNA. When the DNA is ready from DNA, they would further make a mRNA and then finally a protein. So ये क्या हो रहा है? It is opposite of central dogma. In central dogma, DNA to RNA was occurring. Here, RNA to DNA is happening. That's why we call it reverse central dogma. So when you need to write the reverse central dogma or Teminism, you write it like this or you present it like this. See, so basically here what happens, you see, RNA being the genetic material, from RNA first, by reverse transcription, DNA will be made. From DNA, by transcription again, a mRNA will be made, and from mRNA finally a protein will be made. Alright, so what is happening? RNA to DNA by reverse transcription, from DNA to again mRNA by transcription, and then as usual RNA to protein by translation. Understood? This is how you write down or present reverse central dogma that was proposed by Temin and Baltimore. All right. Now, next is palindromic DNA. In certain parts of the DNA, very unique sequencing can be seen. These sequences are unique as because when you read them in any direction, say either in 5' to 3' or else from 3' to 5' direction, they would read the same in both the strands. Okay, for example, see this. 5' to 3', if you read it, it would be GAATTC in one strand, isn't it? In the other strand, in the next strand, if you read it again in the same direction, 5' to 3', read it GAATTC, isn't it? So it's reading the same, the sequence remains same in both the strands if you read it in any of the directions, be it 5' to 3' or 3' to 5'. Understood? So this type of sequences are called palindromic sequences. Palindromic sequences are very important because when you will be learning about biotechnology, you will see that these sequences, they are going to be very important for endonuclease activity. Okay, these are the sites which are recognized by the molecular Caesar, that is the you can say the endonuclease enzymes, where they can eventually recognize these portions of the DNA and can make a cut here, isn't it? So the entire biotechnological application is based on palindromic sequence of DNA. These sequences are very, very important for biotechnological applications to start. Fine. So what is palindromic sequence? A sequence that reads the same in both the strands when read in any of the directions, be it 5' to 3' or 3' to 5'. Is that clear? Now, repetitive DNA. Now, in certain of the portions of DNA, a single nucleotide may be repeated hundreds or thousands of times. Those regions will be known as repetitive DNA. Now, repetitive DNA are important again because they have a unique property. They, during density gradient ultracentrifugation, this part, the repetitive parts of the DNA, they usually separate out from the bulk DNA. Okay, and they would be seen or they would appear as small dark bands. Okay, and we call this DNA that would separate out as repetitive DNA, we will call it to be satellite DNA. Okay, in the end of this chapter, when we discuss DNA fingerprinting, you will find that the DNA fingerprinting process, its principle itself is based on the presence of satellite DNA or repeat sequence DNA. All right. What is it all about? We'll be discussing anyways while we discuss DNA. Fine. So see here, it is a part of the DNA which contains the same sequence of nitrogenous bases repeated more than once in the genome. Sometimes it's repeated thousands of times. All right. Now, these are called satellite DNA and it separates out during density gradient centrifugation as small dark bands. So it will be looking like this. Say 5' to 3', see continuously A nucleotide is repeated. So in the other strand, T is repeated, isn't it? And this repeat may continue for thousands of bases. Alright? So we will call this section of A repeat to be repeat sequence DNA or satellite DNA. And they will form the principle behind DNA fingerprinting. Alright? Understood this part very clearly? All the important terminologies are going to be very important for your exam. So I hope all of you are clear about it and do try to remember that or remember them properly. All right. Now, moving on to another very important topic, that is packaging of DNA helix. All right. Now see, why, first of all, first thing that you need to know is why is DNA packaging required? See, DNA is a very long thread-like structure, whereas the nucleus or the cell in which such long thread has to accommodate, that is very tiny, that is microscopic, isn't it? Fine, DNA is very long, but the place where it should remain, that means the cell or the nucleus, that is very small in comparison. So, a very long structure can remain within a very tiny space when? Only when it is packaged, isn't it? That's why DNA packaging is so much required or it's absolutely necessary. All right, for example, you see, human DNA lengthwise, if you calculate, it is 2.2 meters in length. All right, whereas the nucleus within which it has to remain is 10 to the power minus 6 meters. Just imagine 2.2 meters and it has to remain within a 10 to the power minus 6 meter nucleus. Alright. Likewise for prokaryotes as well, say for E. coli, the entire DNA lengthwise is 1.36 mm. Okay. But the whole cell of E. coli itself is around 1 micrometer. So that means there is a huge difference, right? So for such a huge structure to remain within such a small space, it has to be packaged. And that's how DNA packaging becomes a very important topic for you to understand. Now, see, DNA packaging occurs differently in case of prokaryotes as well as in eukaryotes. In case of prokaryotes, DNA packaging is done by non-histone basic proteins. DNA itself being acidic, something that has to package it has to be basic in nature, isn't it? So DNA packaging proteins are always basic in nature, do remember. So for prokaryotes, the proteins that will help in the packaging of their DNA would be polyamines, and they are positively charged. That is also going to be mandatory. Why? Because DNA itself is negatively charged. So something that has to package it has to be positively charged. Okay. Now, in case of eukaryotes, DNA packaging in eukaryotes is carried out by positively charged. Okay, positively charged, again, basic proteins. And they are the histone proteins. Okay, these are the major and the main proteins required for DNA packaging in eukaryotes. So histone proteins, which are very much enriched with two amino acids, that is lysine and arginine. Okay, they have charged side chains and hence they will help in DNA packaging. So histone proteins mainly help in DNA packaging in eukaryotes. Of course, when DNA packaging has to occur in higher order, there are some non-histone proteins that will also be required in eukaryotes, but mostly when asked, you have to remember it's majorly done by the histone protein. Now, there are mainly 5 types of histones observed, that is H1, H2A, H2B, H3 and H4. These are 5 types of histones that are required for DNA packaging. Now, out of the 5, H2A, H2B, H3 and H4, these 4 in pair means total 8. Okay, these 4 in pairs together will make a circular structure like this. And we will call this structure to be histone octamer because 8 histone proteins are making it up. That's why we will call it histone octamer, or sometimes as new body, NU, new body. All right. Now, see what would happen. Once a histone octamer has been formed, the histone octamer, in the histone octamer, some 200 base pair of DNA will supercoil and the open ends of it will be sealed by H1 histone. So that's where H1 histone is required. In this new body or histone octamer, some 200 base pair of DNA will supercoil like this. That's how the DNA packaging will begin. So it will supercoil like this, but their open ends, the ends, they might again come out, isn't it? So their open ends are sealed by H1 histone. This is the H1 histone that will seal the open end so that the DNA that has been supercoiled cannot come out again. So this whole structure, that is the histone octamer, 200 base pair of DNA and H1 histone sealing the open end, together forms a structure called nucleosome. What do we call it? Nucleosome. Understood? So nucleosome is the first order of packaging of DNA in eukaryotes. All right. So see here, nucleosome appears as beads on string appearance under the electron microscope. See here, say this is one nucleosome, this is another nucleosome. In between remains a part of the DNA that is around 80 base pairs, and we call it the linker DNA. Two adjacent nucleosome will remain connected by a part of the DNA around 80 base pair long, and we will call it the linker DNA. So continuously there will be one nucleosome, again linker DNA, another nucleosome, again there will be one linker DNA, again suppose there is a nucleosome. Continuously this structure, when observed under the electron microscope, it appears to be like beads on string. Understood? Finally, DNA present between the two adjacent nucleosomes is linker DNA, that is 80 base pair, that I just now told you about. So mostly what you need to understand is that nucleosome is the first order of packaging of DNA, right? But further supercoiling will give you various other orders of DNA packaging as well. So these further orders of packaging of DNA are as follows. See, the first one that I have drawn here is the DNA without any packaging. So it is the double helical DNA as per the Watson and Crick model, and it has the diameter of 2 nanometers, 20 Armstrong, so 2 nanometers. You know very well, now that the DNA will start getting packaged, its length will start to reduce and its diameter will start to increase. Okay? So first order of DNA packaging gives you the nucleosome, which is 10 nanometer in diameter. Alright. Further supercoiling of the nucleosome will give you much more of a compact structure, and we will call it solenoid. Solenoid is going to be further 30 nanometer in diameter. Further you supercoil it. Okay, further supercoiling will give you another structure which is further more compact, and we will call it super solenoid, and it is 300 nanometer in diameter. Further you supercoil it, that will be giving you chromatid, that is 700 nanometer. And finally, when the DNA is maximum condensed, it is, at its highest order of packaging, we will get a chromosome, which is diametrically 1400 nanometer approx. Understood this? Fine. So DNA, when unpackaged, it is 2 nanometer in diameter, and highest order of DNA packaging, that's chromosome, is diametrically 1400 nanometer. Understood? But do remember, histone proteins may be the basic proteins which are required for DNA packaging, but as further orders of packaging will continue, some non-histone proteins will also be required during or throughout the process. Alright, so this is all about DNA packaging. I hope all of you are clear about today's class. In the next class, we'll start with search for genetic material.